Hey, Victor.
Hi, Jen.
All right, Victor is here to help me show you everyone's absolute favorite and quintessential yoga pose, downward facing dog, or in Sanskrit, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Repeat after me. Adho
Adho.
Mukha
Mukha.
Svanasana.
Svanasana.
Nice. Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. All right, this is kind of the pose that everyone thinks about when they think of yoga, right? It's either like down dog or maybe lotus pose. But this pose, I would say, along with chaturanga, is my most asked about yoga pose from my students. The big question is, how do I look in these leggings in my down dog? No. The big question is, am I doing this pose right? Have you ever wondered that?
Totally.
Yeah, I think every single yogi who's ever stepped on the mat has wondered, am I doing my downward facing dog correctly? And surprisingly, there are very few teachers that come and help their students out in down dog and answer questions that students might have. Why is that? Well, because it's complex, right? So we've already looked at tabletop position, we've looked at hasta bandha, we've looked at how individual people's bodies have unique bone structures. So it's really difficult to say what is quote unquote right for you and how you should look in your downward facing dog without the teacher being inside your body. So that's the first point that I want to make, is that no two dogs are the same. Just like when you walk down the street or go to the dog park, no two dogs are alike. Just like that, as you walk into your yoga room and start to teach, you will realize that no two downward facing dogs are alike. And that's exactly as it should be, okay? So let's begin first by looking at the basic form of downward facing dog without looking at any of the details, without any of the nuances. Forget hasta bandha, forget shoulder integration. Let's just get into the basic shape of the pose first. All right, come into tabletop position. All fours, please. All right, tuck your toes under, lift your hips. As you exhale, press back into downward facing dog. All right, and you see the natural tendency, or you're probably practicing along as well, and you feel this in your own body. The tendency is to pedal out the dog, so you can do that, Victor. You can bend your knees one at a time, walk your dog out, but go slow, go slow. This is yoga. We're not running a race. All right. Okay, and then once you find steadiness in the pose, you feel like you can hold it here for a while. Just notice where you feel this pose. Where do you feel the effects of your down dog? And you're probably noticing a big opening in the entire back side of the body, from the soles of the feet all the way into the Achilles tendon, the calves, the hamstrings, the hips, the low back, the spine, the neck, the crown of the head, and the arms and the fingers. Really, the entire backside of the body is lengthening. And you're probably feeling this little trickle of blood into your head, this kind of brain juice that we're getting in this inversion in the pose. And you might notice that there is some more breath coming into your body as well. Okay. So down dog is a really awesome pose because it's not only a forward fold, but it's also an inversion. We have the hips above the heart, and it's also an arm balance. So we have to think about the wrists a lot, the shoulders a lot, lengthening the spine a lot. We have to think about how to find our best inversion and make sure that we feel comfortable in this position. And then we also have to think about the neutrality and the positioning of our pelvis and our spine in our forward fold. Okay, go ahead and lower your knees softly down to the mat and make your way back down into tabletop or child's pose. Okay, so that is basically everything that you need to know about yoga in a nutshell. You can take Shavasana.
Okay.
You can go home. You can finish your yoga practice for your lifetime. It's all done. Okay, so now that we've looked at just the basic form of downward facing dog, let's get into some of the finer details and the nuances, okay? So come on back into your tabletop position. So let's begin by reviewing concepts that you've already learned today, hasta bandha being the first one. Spread your fingers out as wide as you can and your thumbs as well. Good. From here, point your first fingers to the top of the mat, parallel with the outer edges of the mat, or take the hand placement that felt best for you. And then along those same lines, walk your hands either closer in from shoulder distance apart, or shoulder distance apart, or maybe even a little bit wider than shoulder distance apart, depending on you and your body and your bone structure and your level of stability. Okay, from here, broaden your collarbone apart. Good, widen your shoulders apart. And then gently squeeze your shoulder blades down the back as you simultaneously push the mat away from you. We fire up the rhomboids, we fire up the serratus anterior muscles. Both of these muscle groups working to stabilize the shoulder blades on the back. All right, from here, pull your low belly gently up and in. We haven't talked about the core yet, but we'll just keep it simple with that. And now, tuck your toes under. Lift your knees, float your hips up and back on an exhale to press back into downward facing dog, keeping all of the actions in the upper half of the body. All right, beautiful. Now, notice if your tendency is to try to pull your shoulder blades down away from your ears. Don't do that. Let the shoulder blades lift up with the arms. We have the arms up and overhead, so let the shoulder blades rotate with the arm bones. But gently squeeze your shoulder blades together as you simultaneously push your hands forward on the mat to press your chest back towards your thighs. You'll notice that this lengthens the spine and also activates these muscles, the serratus anterior muscles that support the shoulders in this pose. Okay, from here, bend your knees, roll your sitting bones up to the sky. Good. Notice that this helps you find a more neutral position in your lumbar spine. Keep that. If you need to keep your knees bent here, absolutely no problem. Keep the knees bent. Otherwise, keep this positioning in your low back and straighten your legs again. All right, last thing we're gonna do here is press down into your feet and drag your heels without moving your feet away from each other. And this will help you find inner spiraling of your thighs. Okay, take one more breath here, in and out. And as you exhale, softly lower your knees down onto the mat. Come back into tabletop or even child's pose if you'd like. Okay, so we've talked about some of the nuances of downward facing dog, and there are actually quite a few more things that we can get into. I just wanted to give you and Victor a little break here. But really, the main things that we're talking about here are positioning the hands, finding the stability in the wrists, finding stability in the shoulder joints, externally rotating the shoulders, broadening the collarbones out. And I just want to show you one quick thing in relation to the idea of external rotation in the shoulder joint. So Victor, you can actually step to the side for a second. And I'm going to demo something that I see happen quite often, which is major internal rotation of the shoulders. Okay, so I'm going to face the camera here so you can really see what I'm talking about. And let's imagine that I have my fingers pointing in like this, or they can even be forward. This doesn't really dictate the shoulders so much. But what I often see is the elbows bent and out to the sides like this. And when this happens, if you can do it on yourself or even see in the camera, the head of my upper arm bone starts to travel forward and roll down like this. So if I were to keep going in this direction, you can see how it would travel forward and down. This could create some instability and maybe possibly some wear and tear on the front of the shoulder joint, which is why we cue external rotation. So what we can do is, if we see our students going into this position, first we need to notice it. So check out my upper back and my neck and my elbows and my shoulders, my fingers as well. Okay, so if you practice like this or you see your students practicing like this, we definitely want to say something. You can bring them out of the pose and first ask, are you comfortable in your downward facing dog? Does this feel comfortable in your shoulders, in your hands, in your wrists, in your arms? And generally, the majority of the people that I ask that question say no. Some people say yes, and I don't know, maybe they're just scared to say no. They're like, ooh, what's she gonna make me do? But I think most people are not so comfortable with that positioning, but they just don't know how to do the pose. So From here, you can tell them, point your index finger forward. This already brings us into more of a position of external rotation in the upper arm bones. And now, what you can show them as well in tabletop is you can show them the elbows bent off to the sides. Tell them to straighten the arms and roll what I like to call the elbow bellies, or the soft part of the elbows, towards the fingers, like this. So going from this to this. And this helps us hug the arm bones in and then externally rotate them as well while keeping the collarbone broad. So it actually creates more space in the chest. And if I keep going in this position, you can see, it's just opening like this star bursting effect that we want in the chest, okay? So this is another thing to think about in downward dog. We're gonna come into it one more time and notice your position of your elbows, of your upper arm bones, and of your wrists. And again, we wanna think about how can I create stability in my wrist joint so that if I were to go from downward dog into plank, into chaturanga, into upward facing dog, I'm not rolling in and I'm not rolling off to the sides, but everything is firmly integrated and stable on the mat, and then maintaining this external rotation in the upper arm bones. Okay, so Victor, if you can come back into tabletop. Set yourself up again one more time, Hasta Bandha. Pick your hand positioning. Pick your finger positioning. Now roll your elbow bellies forward towards the top of your mat. And now one thing that I do want to say here is that this can be overdone. So you don't need to do this so hard that it feels uncomfortable. And actually all of the energetic things that we're doing on the mat here, you want to think about them and practice them, but not 110%. This is more just like consciously being able to move the body into certain positions without forcefully doing it, okay? So like we do it one time and we do it really well, and then from there on out, we don't think about it as much and we don't try so hard. So it's about like a 50% thing. And this is enough. This is really enough in order to get the actions that we're looking for. Okay. So from here, integrate the heads of the arm bones in by lowering your chest down, squeeze the shoulder blades down the back. At the same time, press the mat away, lift the back of the heart up. Good. Okay, elbow bellies are forward. Broaden the collarbone apart, widen your shoulders apart. Nice. Neutralize your low belly. And now press down into the balls of your feet and your toes and float your hips up and back. Okay. Beautiful. And now you notice that we found the internal rotation of the legs. The more we press down into the feet, and then imagine that we're dragging the heels away from each other, the more we internally rotate the thigh bones. This creates more space in the back of the pelvis, more space in the sacrum, more space for the lumbar spine to lengthen up out of the pelvis and find neutrality in the low back and then through the rest of the spine as well. All right, we're gonna come into a couple modifications now. So the first one is to bend the knees really deeply. So if you find that the back is rounding, actually, Victor, can you show us what a really round back downward facing dog looks like? Yes. Okay, so you can see that he's got this really big, deep round in the lumbar and the thoracic spine area. So instead of that, of course, we want to roll the pelvis forward, lifting the sitting bones up, widening them apart. Now, for many people, this is a very deep forward fold. They're gonna have to bend their knees in order to find this neutrality in the pelvis. You can bend them as much as you want to. As you bend them, though, lift the sitting bones up to the sky and widen the sitting bones apart. Okay, you can come on down, take a couple of breaths, and I'm gonna show you another thing that we can do in downward facing dog, which for many people, this feels really good. This isn't my favorite variation or modification of the pose, but this could help to relax some people. So you might have heard down dog expressed as being a very relaxing pose. And I would say that this takes many, many years to get to that point where you're like, thank God we're in down dog for 10 breaths now. So one thing that we can do is take a block underneath the head and at least relax the head and the neck muscles, which I do want to say down dog is great for this lengthening of the spine. So we get this really nice release in the neck. The head can kind of dangle, and then every single bone in the spine, all of these vertebrae here, they space out and are, they're so spaced. Our discs that run in between all of these bones have a little bit more room to breathe in our down dog. So it's a really good pose for axial extension, this lengthening of the spine. Okay, let's try with a block under the head. And depending on your head length and your spine length, this will dictate what position you put your block in. So we'll just try it like this. Alrighty. Come on into the pose at your own time. Good. Yeah. So this is a really nice way to be able to hold the pose for a little bit longer and turn it into more of a restorative pose, although I really find it difficult to call it a restorative pose because we have so much activity happening in this pose and so many muscles working. But this might be a really nice position to take, especially if you're holding downward dog for multiple breaths. So this is one option that you can give to your students who are finding it difficult to relax their shoulders, their neck, and their head. Okay. You can come on down. All right. And now, since we're in this area of the head, neck, and shoulders, I do want to look at the positioning of the head. And sorry, I said we were only going to do down dog one more time. I totally lied. Okay, so let's think about spinal neutrality in this pose, just like we thought about it in Tadasana and all of the other poses that we've looked at so far, basically. We want to make sure that we have our head in a neutral position with the rest of our spine, which means we're not tucking our chin and looking between the thighs, and we're also not coming into a back bending position with the neck. But generally this means that the ears are in line with the upper arms. So let's have a look at that, if you don't mind, Victor. And you can just show us the two extremes, right? So in your dog now, can you tuck your chin to your chest? Okay, so this happens a lot, especially in Ashtanga. They say, look at your belly button. Well, this kind of puts our neck in a very deep flexion here, which isn't the end of the world, but it might be uncomfortable. And now do the opposite. Yeah, look up towards your fingertips. You get this a lot as well. Also, just bringing tension into the back of the neck unnecessarily. Okay, and now find a neutral position so that your entire spine is just cascading down and then releasing energy through the top of your head. All of the thoughts of the day, all of your stress and troubles and worries, just empty them out through your brain and the crown of your head. Okay, beautiful. And you can release back down. So let's look at one more variation. So we had the block underneath the forehead. Now let's look at placing the block in between the thighs like this, and then giving the legs a little squeeze in and then back. So this move really helps to find this inner spiraling. When we can feel like we're moving the thighs back, we move the block back and find this inner spiraling of the thighs to create more space in the low back. All right, so go ahead and in tabletop position, slide the block in between your legs. And you want the block to be positioned so that your knees end up hip distance apart. Okay. Good. And now you can already feel you need to use your adductor muscles, these muscles in the inner thighs, to keep the block in position. So you can already fire those muscles up, find Hasta Bandha, integrate the shoulders, find a neutral spine, do all of these beautiful things that we need to do to set up for our downward facing dog. Tuck the toes under, and on an exhale, lift up and back. Good. And now gently squeeze your legs into the block. And this just helps us find midline. So this is the center line of the body. This can be really helpful for when we're doing things like Warrior 3, or we're coming into poses where it's really helpful to pull energy into the middle of the body for whatever reason, maybe arm balancing, maybe inversions. Okay, good. And now from here, drag your heels apart without really moving your feet, and notice that the block starts to move back behind you and your inner thighs start to spiral back and away from each other. Okay, beautiful. All right, and then gently release down on an exhale, lowering the knees, release the block. Okay, nice. Now, let's talk about some variations that we can take in downward facing dog. So we had the block under the head. We had the block in between the thighs. One other thing that we can do is to come into what's called three-legged dog. This is one of my absolute favorite poses. It's great to open the hamstrings, open the hips, and really get a feeling of like spaciousness in down dog, because with all 4 points of contact on the ground, we can sometimes feel a little bit sticky and solid in the pose, which is beautiful. But at other times, we want to be open and a little bit more wild and carefree. So three-legged dog is a great alternative. So let's come into that pose, starting with downward facing dog. All right. From down dog, float your left leg up as you inhale. Spread the toes out nice and wide. And straighten your leg. So it doesn't really matter how high the leg goes, but straighten the leg by lifting the left kneecap up. Beautiful. This is one variation. We can hold it like this. Perfect. Or we can open the hip more. Bend the left knee. Stack your left hip on top of the right. Try to bring your left heel towards your right hip, right glute. Beautiful. Nice. And now try to spin your left shoulder back down towards the mat, but keep the hip open. Not so easy. Straighten the legs, square the hips as you inhale, and exhale, release the left foot down. Okay. Good. Now let's release the jaw. Open your mouth, stick out your tongue. Okay. And let's do the other side very quickly just to balance out. Inhale, float the right leg up. Exhale, bend the knee, open the hip to the side, stack the hips, and try to keep your right shoulder facing down so your chest is squared down to the mat. Good. All right. And then when you're ready to release, straighten the leg and lower back down. Release down into tabletop or into child's pose. Okay. So we've already discussed in tabletop pose what we can do to support the wrists in case anyone is feeling any pain there. So of course we have those same options: folding the mat, using blocks, using the wedges underneath the heels of the hands. Those are available, and as well we can come down onto the forearms in downward facing dog. This pose is actually a different pose called Dolphin pose, and it requires much more openness in the backs of the legs, in all the hamstring area, but also the fascia and this webbing and all the connective tissues, as well as the muscles of the hips and the low back. So I don't know if Victor's up for it. Yeah, for 3 breaths?
Not my strongest pose,
Not mine either. I don't think it's anyone's strongest pose. Okay, so to set up for dolphin pose, instead of coming into tabletop on your hands, you'll actually come down onto your forearms. And you can either pronate your forearms by bringing your palms flat onto the floor like this, or my favorite version is to either take Anjali Mudra with the hands or even to interlock the hands. So your choice. This version with the palms flat is going to require more opening in the shoulders. Okay, good. So here he is. This is his version of tabletop now. Tuck the toes under, and the same thing, just float the hips up. Yeah, okay. So this one's a generally pretty sticky pose for many, many people. You can, of course, keep the knees bent, and you want to focus on lifting the sitting bones up and making them the highest point in the pose, just like with downward facing dog. And then again, finding the spinal neutrality and relaxing the head as much as possible. Yeah, bringing the head in line with the spine. Okay, beautiful. And then bend your knees and release down whenever you're ready to come out. Good. Okay. So we had downward facing dog, all the actions. We had a couple of variations with the blocks, and we also had variations with three-legged dog and an open-hipped three-legged dog. All right, dolphin pose as well, and then everything that we can do for the wrists to support our students with a little bit of sensitivity in the wrists. One thing that I do want to say about the wrists is that the more you practice, the stronger the muscles that support the wrists will get, and then the easier these poses will become. Okay, good. Any other notes about down dog?
No, no question.
Okay, cool. So this was downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Have fun saying that Sanskrit name.